Right, everybody, as we just get this, as we continue, um, we're going to just a few words about justice and beyond. Obviously, since the pandemic, we have not been meeting in person. We have been meeting by the way of Zoom, and thank God for this forum that we have and this platform that we have to be able to meet together. And so we meet every Monday at 5 o'clock. We'll be taking a couple of weeks off coming up, and so that we may observe the holiday coming up and also just take a break. But just so you know, Justice and Beyond is not led by one or two people. We never want one person to be the sole face of Justice and Beyond. And so they're behind me, both not literally but figuratively, is a host of other folks that we like to call pillars. A pillar is anybody, an organization, or individual that like to sign on and say that they want to be a part of the planning and the visioning of where Justice and Beyond can go and needs to go. And so we love to add new pillars to this discussion. We want to always be a Black-led organization that amplifies the voices of brown and Black people and the issues that affect them. And so the pillars meet regularly on Tuesday at 12 o'clock. There's no qualifications for that other than that you be a concerned citizen and that you be willing to show up for those meetings. So we've been doing this now for about 10 years and we'll continue to hold it down for the sake of justice within the greater New Orleans area and even beyond, even extending to the river parishes as we help those in fighting for environmental justice. And so with that said, I just want to let you know this is a safe place. We want to operate with love, respect, and in peace in all things that are said. We may disagree, but we don't ever want to be disrespectful. So with that said, I want to first thank our guest panelists for being here tonight, who bring a perspective and an understanding of the issue at hand, Louisiana tax equity and spending justice, and as it relates to their field. And so again, thank you. And I would like for each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and to do it within a 60 seconds, if you could, about you tell us just a little bit about you and your work in your organization. And so welcome, Jan Moller. We appreciate you being here tonight with the Louisiana budget project. If you would just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, everybody, and thank you, Reverend Manning, for the invitation to be here. I'm Jan Moller. I'm the executive director of the Louisiana Budget Project. We are a policy, research, and advocacy organization with offices in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And we look primarily at state budget and tax policies and how they affect low and moderate income families in Louisiana. So we look at our tax structure, but our budget and also the things that we buy with our budget dollars, healthcare, education, the public safety net, all the important things that families need to be able to reach their full potential. And I've been doing this work for about 11 years. Prior to that, I was a journalist, most recently covering the state capitol in Baton Rouge. But before that, I've worked in Nevada and Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Thank you, Jan. Appreciate you being here tonight. And thank you for your work. Representative Matthew Willard, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you, Reverend Manning. My name is Matthew Willard, State Representative for District 97. I cover Gentilly, areas around Bayou St. John and Mid-City. I serve on the House Insurance, Ways and Means, Municipal, Parochial, and Cultural Affairs Committees. I'm also the founder and chairperson of the STEM Innovation Caucus, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I am honored to be serving on this panel with my good friend Jan.
All right, thank you, Representative Willard. We appreciate you being here. Erin Hansen, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is Erin Hansen. I am an analyst with Together Louisiana. Together Louisiana is a statewide network of local organizations in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, Alexandria, East Carroll Parish, Lake Providence, and a few other areas around the state. I know many of you from that work. So Reverend Manning's church is a member, Betty DeMarco in the Carrollton neighborhood, Jan Muller's organization is a member, Together Baton Rouge. Jeff Connor invited me to be here with St. Mark. So we represent institutions, and we work to help those institutions come together to do good on their mission to make the world a better place.
All right. Thank you, Erin. We appreciate you being here. Always good to see all of you. And thank you for just being willing to be here and share your expertise. So we want to know what went down in this last session and how we just need to be aware of that. And so the first question would be, what was enacted in this session that just ended that we need to be aware of as far as policy changes that occurred? And so anybody can take that, but let me just start with Jan. What do you know of that was enacted in this last session as far as policy changes?
Well, I think the big issue for the legislature this session was the state budget, and that's what I think grabbed the most attention. And the budget bills right now aren't finished because they're sitting on the governor's desk. I was kind of hoping that we would find out which items he signed and which items he vetoed by now, but I'm told that it's going to come later in the week, possibly as late as Friday. I think the good news on the budget is, and I'm told that Erin needs to share a tax swap video. The good news on the budget is that there were a lot of revenue available to the state this session, both in the kind of ongoing expenses of state government, and then they had a lot of excess revenue and surplus revenue to distribute. The other piece of good news, I think, was that there weren't any major tax cuts passed during this session, which is something we were very worried about because because that would have, of course, made it harder to fund state priorities, not just next year, but in future years. On the other hand, there were some real opportunities that were passed up. I think Representative Willard had a wonderful bill to increase the earned income tax credit. There was a legislation to create a child tax credit. There was legislation to create a paid family and medical leave for Louisiana. Those bills did not make it out of committee in most cases. So the legislature, I think, in many ways, it was a status quo session. And sometimes that's better than the alternative. So, but the big ticket is really what's going to happen with the budget bills. You may have heard that there was a lot of chaos in the last 30 minutes or so, where there were some cuts made to the Louisiana Department of Health that hadn't really been vetted. I am told that is going to get vetoed by the governor. I mean, he's been pretty clear that he plans to do that. We don't know that for sure yet, but that's the expectation, certainly. But I know my time is limited, but
Yeah.
in all, I think the other thing people need to know is that there were a lot of investments made in the budget that are going to be paying off for years and years in water infrastructure, in coastal protection and restoration, in highway construction. A lot of money was put away for some really important things that are going to pay off for years to come for Louisiana.
That's a good thing. Thank you, Jan, for that concise kind of summary. Let me ask you this: that chaos that ensued in that last 30 minutes that affected the Louisiana Department of Health, what sorts of things were proposed that would be cut that we're hoping that the governor would veto?
Well, so let's be clear. It's not unusual for the budget bills to pass in the last couple of hours of the session. What made this unusual was the size of the cut that was included at the last minute in those budget bills. And the legislature kind of had a very hard decision to make because they got those budget bills with 15, 20 minutes to go, maybe even less. And they were faced with decisions that had kind of been made behind closed doors. And so And there had been no, they take testimony on the budget for weeks and weeks during the session where every agency comes up and talks about their budget. At no point had there been a discussion about what would happen if you cut $100 million from the Department of Health. And it didn't specify where that money would be cut. It just said, cut $100 million from the Department of Health. The health department, most of the state dollars that come up get matched with federal dollars. So if you cut $100 million in state support, that comes out to a $600 or $700 million cut overall. And now you're talking about real money that supports a lot of people with low incomes who need health care. And the way the health department's budget is structured, there are a lot of places that you can't cut. There are a lot of what we call mandatory spending in there. So when you go and look for places that you actually can cut, you end up affecting certain programs a lot more than others. And so the Department of Health came out at a hearing last week and said, well, if we have to cut $100 million, here's where it's going to be cut. And there was some real devastating cuts in there. But again, the expectation is that the governor is going to veto that cut, which means he has to cut $100 million somewhere else in the budget. And we don't know exactly where he's going to make up that $100 million, but we can be pretty sure it's not going to be taken from the health department. So again, I think the Department of Health is not going to get cut, but had this cut been allowed to stand, it would have been very, very devastating to a lot of people with low incomes who depend on the Department of Health and the Medicaid program in particular for their basic healthcare needs. You don't get on Medicaid unless you have a disability or unless your income is so low that you cannot afford private health insurance. So we're talking by definition people who need this healthcare to survive, and a lot of them would have been again not getting the healthcare that they need, and the healthcare providers wouldn't have been paid to provide those services too. So.
Absolutely. I sigh and thank God for a Democratic governor for this time right now. And yeah, thank you for enlightening us and giving us more information on that. Let me move to Erin. Jan indicated that you had a video.
Yeah, I was invited to share an 11-minute video that can give us some frame and setup. As long as we're all consenting to that, I'd like to do that.
Yeah, I think we're everybody good with that. Anybody have any objection?
Okay, good. Let me just kind of frame what the video is. So Together Louisiana has a tool that we use in our organizing called Civic Academies. And Civic Academies are where we take an issue that is complicated, like the tax system in Louisiana, and we dig in and educate ourselves about that issue well enough to be able to teach it to each other. And so back in 2016, we did a series of Civic Academies. We called that Civic Academy series the Great Louisiana Tax Swap. And the video that I'm about to show you is of Reverend Dr. Theron Jackson. He actually wasn't a doctor at that time. Now he's a doctor. He's a pastor of Morning Star Baptist Church, which is a church up in Shreveport. They are a member of our organization up there. And it is a video of him teaching the tax system, in particular, the tax swap, which I won't give away the farm and tell you what it is yet. You'll have to watch closely to pick up on that. But at that time in 2016, we were attempting to make sense of essentially a crisis that was occurring, which was a series of tax cuts, income tax cuts, and special deals that had hollowed out our public services. And so it was, in particular, it was higher education and healthcare that had taken the biggest hit. This was under Bobby Jindal's tenure as governor. And so Louisianans were grappling with how to face that. And so we developed this video, which I'm about to show you. We edited it, put it up on YouTube. And so we'll use it as a way to sort of set the scene so you can kind of understand tax system is super complicated, but what are the basics? How is the tax system structured? We do that because the powers that be want us to think it's super complicated and that we can't understand it, and to throw up our hands and say, well, we'll just let somebody else take care of that. And we know we can't do that. And the other reason to use this as a framing device is this video is now 8 years old, but many of the same questions that were coming up in 2016 are coming up again this year. And so without any further ado, I'll play the video. And it is about 11 minutes. I wouldn't mind if somebody lets me know once I get going that you can hear it.
We are beginning today a very public information education campaign
You all hear?
to help us understand in depth
We can hear
the
it.
structure of our state. This is the beginning of what we hope will be something that will be followed across this state with civic academies, helping the average citizen understand our tax structure, to bring about the changes that are necessary to get us out of this perpetual crisis in state government.
I'm not an economist, and I don't pretend to be one, but I am a shade tree accountant of my own resources. And Governor Edwards, we are not here today largely to either inform you nor instruct you about the current situation. We believe that you are aware. Neither are we here so much to instruct or inform those of you who are here, but to create a framework for facilitating discussions around the state in our cities and our towns and our small group meetings about exactly what is happening in the state of Louisiana. As a background, let me suggest to you, from a taxation perspective, states across the nation rely basically on 4 major taxes. Those are individual income taxes, corporate income taxes, property taxes, and sales taxes. There are other taxes and fees, of course, but these big 4 account for about 92% of the way states produce revenue. And the main differences between states are just really how we mix these 4. How does Louisiana stack up? First of all, let's look at our individual income taxes, and I hope that you'll be able to share this information. It's relatively simple. Louisiana has a generally low individual income tax. As a matter of fact, we rank 39th out of 50. The average person in the United States pays about $1,070 in income taxes. In the state of Louisiana, we pay about, on average, $592. That's about $478 below the national average. We have a generally low individual income tax. Then our corporate income tax, which for today is calculated on a per capita basis. We have a very low corporate income tax. People around the nation per capita pay about $168 annually. We pay about $55 annually. That is 44th out of 50 states. That's $113 less than the national average. Louisiana has a very low corporate income tax structure. When it comes to our property taxes, not just very low, but we have an extremely low property tax structure. People around the United States pay on average $2,229 a year. The state of Louisiana residents on average pay about $644. That's nearly $1,600 in difference from the national, below, if you will, the national average. It places us 47th out of 50. We have an extremely low property tax structure. But when it comes to sales taxes, residents in all of the United States paid on average about $953 annually. If you live in the state of Louisiana, you pay about $2,065 annually. That's $1,112 above the national average, more than double the national average. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a good announcement. We are first in the nation with extremely high sales taxes. We are the highest in the nation. Why does that matter? I want you to soak that in for just a moment. We have low income tax structure, a relatively low overall tax burden, but a very high sales tax burden. What we wanted to talk about today was this big tax swap from 2008 to 2016. How has the state tax system changed? And more importantly, who's benefited and who's paid? We want to use this word. You hear this word regressive quite a bit. In a very simple terminology, the lower your income, the higher the rate of taxes you pay, that's an obvious incongruence, a converse relationship that basically says if you're poor, you pay more. Should I say that again? If you are poor, you pay more. Who paid in 2008? I want you to see this. By income group, the top 1% of earners in Louisiana paid about 4.2% of their income in local and state tax, while the bottom 20%, who make about $9,800 a year, paid 10.4% of their income. If I don't know what the Webster's definition of ridiculous is, but here's an illustration. Who paid in 2008? The top versus the bottom, and these were, I might add, the good old days. The big swap then comes as we move beyond this 2008 in these good old days, if you will, when Louisiana had, as I referenced earlier, $865 million budget surplus. Our state unemployment rate was at 3.2%. These were the good days. While other states were grappling with how they were going to cut their budgets and struggling, Louisiana was experiencing a budget surplus. What happened? I would argue that there were 4 disastrous decisions that drove us into this crisis. Number 1, you'll find the Stelly cuts. For those of you who don't know, if I could just take one moment in a very simple way to talk about what the Stelly plan was. It was Louisiana's effort to be progressive in its taxation, to say that more money in this state should be raised from income taxes than sales taxes. In 2002, those of us who are in this room, voted to pass that Stelly plan. It was later repealed, and I guess it was in 2008, the legislature rolled back that income, and because of that, we have nearly a $1 billion loss in annual revenue. We don't have a lot of time, but I want you to see the red line represents the revenue trend line that kept going up. The blue line will represent the actual state revenues. You can see the pre-Katrina and then the post-storm peak that happened in 2008, and that's the exact time when we began to cut taxes and make these drops around 2009, 2010, at the worst possible time to do it. And our next slide, you'll see that not only was it the Stelly plan that was a problem, the second decision that drove us to this crisis was an unprecedented cut in public services. For today's purposes, I want to use the public service that we most recognize, and that is higher education. You heard Betty Jo Kaufman talk about this. Well, in 2008 and 2009, those good old days, we expended $1.68 billion, invested, I might add, in higher education. By 2014 and 15, the number was $918 million. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a $764 million change, a reduction in investment, or a 45% change. It represents the deepest cuts to higher education in the United States of America. Did you see that? At the same time, we began to do what I think was a remedy that could be seen as the worst remedy. We began to tax the aspiration of young people in Louisiana. We increased tuition and fees at a rate of 52% higher than anywhere in the United States of America. And our tuition and fees rose faster by far than any other state in the nation. Did you see that? We began to tax the aspirations of those people in whose hands our future is. The third decision was a massive increase in corporate tax exemptions. Now, you have to see this, and I want us to leave the higher education so that we can juxtapose these two categories. In corporate exemptions in 2008, 2009, the good old days, there was a $1.37 billion state expenditure on corporate tax exemptions, coming from corporate tax exemptions, if you will. $2.3 billion by the year 2014, 2015. That is a $924 million increase, a 68% change in increases in corporate exemptions. Ladies and gentlemen, the increases in the corporate exemptions would have paid for the entirety of the higher ed cuts with $160 million to spare per year. There ought to be some sense. I heard Reverend Wesley talk about something earlier today, spiritual, and talk about being grieved in the spirit. But ladies and gentlemen, there ought to be a righteous indignation about being a state who has chosen to take this route. Listen to me and hear me well. Cutting corporate taxes often is seen as an economic development strategy. But I want to say to you today that the best laid plans of economic development come unraveled by a poor education system where the labor force is not prepared for those corporations who move to Louisiana. We cannot dumb our way to the top, and somebody needs to say something in downtown Baton Rouge. Ladies and gentlemen, the 4 decisions that drove us into a crisis, those 3, and finally, there is this big swap. Using sales tax increases to replace the revenue loss from income that came from tax cuts and corporate exemptions. Cuts to progressive taxes dug the hole. When we increased corporate deductions, that cost us $1.1 billion in that hole. When we cut the stellar income tax rates, that cost us $800 million in that hole. And we now seek to fill a $1.9 billion hole with a regressive tax increase. And ladies and gentlemen, we cannot sustain that. Swapping a more regressive tax to replace a less regressive tax is not just regressive, it's wealth redistribution from those who have the least to those who have the most. It is not.
I'm going to pause it there, not because the last 5 minutes is not important. In the last 5 minutes, Reverend Dr. Theron Jackson talks about what a regressive tax system actually means for Louisianans. And so I'm going to drop the link to the entire video in the chat so that folks can watch that on their own time. Reverend Manning, do we have time to take reactions to that?
Yeah, I just we do. That wasn't our plan, but I think we just need to take maybe about 2 or 3 reactions from that, because that was just so impactful and insightful and really jaw-dropping information. So let me see. Anybody have any reactions, any comments, any questions for Erin real quick? Any thoughts? Everybody's still in this mode of being shocked. Anybody?
I'm seeing Lane Trippy. I'm sorry if I'm
Tripp?
pronouncing
Yeah, Lane Tripp. Yeah, go ahead, Lane.
Yeah,
and you're on.
I'm curious. This video must have been seen by at least a few of the legislators, you know, at the time and perhaps since. If that's true, as far as you know, I mean, what's been their reaction? Is this something that's just shrugged off?
I don't know. It's a good question about who has seen it. 2016 was the year that the legislature voted to increase the sales tax by a point. So it went up from 4% to 5% that year. And I'm sure, Jan, you can speak more authoritatively about just what happened. This was before my time doing politics in Louisiana. I know from the reaction of us showing it to our leaders that the reaction is like, what are we going to do about this? And so I'll be curious to hear Representative Willard's reaction as well.
Representative Willard, you want to respond to that? Any of your colleagues seen this, had opportunity to?
I can't comment on if anybody has seen that video, but essentially it appears that we are heading toward history repeating itself. If y'all recall, I believe it was last year? 2 years ago. 2 years ago at the ballot, there was an amendment to restructure income taxes for personal and for corporate. That measure passed maybe with 55% of the votes statewide. What that measure did was it lowered corporate income tax rates, and it lowered personal income tax rates. And obviously that takes away from the funding that we have available. What we are seeing now is a desire to completely eliminate personal income taxes. That was actually one of the measures that we heard this year during session in the Ways and Means Committee. If you eliminate personal income taxes, I believe that's about $4 billion that comes out of the state budget. And we just overhauled the rates. So because of that, we were able to stop it this year, but I guarantee you it comes back in 2025 during the next fiscal session. So the question, and there was even a subcommittee that was established to look at how you go about eliminating personal income tax. And, you know, ultimately a number of things has to happen, right? You have to likely reduce some of the incentive programs that the state spends money on. Those will include enterprise zones, the quality jobs program. Also, you have to really go into sales taxes. So one of the measures that the legislature continued to kick the can on was that temporary sales tax increase, which the video is referring to. The reason that temporary sales tax increase came about, and I believe that happened under Governor John Bel Edwards, was because of all of the financial mismanagement that occurred under Governor Jindal. And a lot of it was using one-time dollars to plug budget holes from the Stelly tax cut and all of the exemptions and deductions and exclusions that were added to the books during that 2010 to 2016 period. So that 0.45 sales tax increase is set to expire in 2025. When it does, that takes about $450 million away from the budget. So, you know, as a logical, rational legislator, I say there's no way you can eliminate personal income tax and let that 0.45 roll off the books. In fact, you probably will have to increase the sales tax rate. And actually, that was part of the package. So the bill this year to eliminate the personal income tax included an increase in the personal income tax. It also would require an income, a property tax increase. So if the state has less money to go around, that means it has less to spend on services. It has less to send to local governments. So increase in property taxes would be a way to offset that so local governments could provide for that shortage of services. But ultimately, if you eliminate personal income tax, if you take it a step further and eliminate corporate income tax, which now only accounts for $1 billion in our budget, it should be higher. It only accounts for $1 billion right now. You're looking at close to $6 billion in a shortage in your budget. You have to increase sales taxes. You have to cut spending. And when you cut spending in Louisiana, at least, where does it happen? It happens in healthcare. It happens through the Department of Health, and it happens in education, K through 12, MFP formula, and in higher education.
Thank you, Representative Willard. I know that Max Reichard has a question. Let me go to that before I get to some more questions that have been pre-written. And I understand, Representative Willard, you have to leave at 6:15. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I have to jump off at 6:15. I have a family dinner, and it's actually some family I've never met before. So
that's exciting. Well, good reason to go. Max, you got a question?
He's on mute, Reverend Manning. Max, you're on mute.
Matt,
Thank you,
go ahead,
Jeff.
Max. All right.
Thank you, Reverend Manning. Yeah, I'm so personally outraged by this because I spent the bulk of my career in public higher education in Louisiana. My wife spent her career in healthcare as a psychologist, and both of those suffered so much under Jindal and this kind of tax structure that we've got. Just think about the needs we have right now. NOAA was a great hospital for adolescents and children. Uptown New Orleans, gone. Mandeville, Southeast Louisiana State Hospital, great hospital particularly for adults and children, gone, right? Nothing to replace them, nothing. It's outrageous. UNO, all right? Not even half the students that were there 20 years ago, not half. That's a direct result of what you were talking about, Erin, or what that video was talking about, a direct result of students having to pay for the bulk of their education now. It's actually upside down. When I started in higher education in Louisiana, students were paying maybe a third of the costs, right? Now they're paying 2/3 of their costs. That's outrageous for us to be in this situation and not have more outrage out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's righteous indignation. It is very fitting. We all should be angered and move to do whatever we can. Thank you, Max. Let me go ahead, unless there's any other questions or comments on STAC that I can take real quickly before we just get back to other questions. Anybody?
Reverend Manning, just one more reaction to the initial question, just about how have people reacted to this? Is that, yep, that sounds good. Is that, there was another Representative Willard, when you were talking about what happened a couple of years ago, I was thinking about the Amendment 5 fight, which some of you in this room were involved in, which was a constitutional amendment that would have written in, another corporate tax loophole. It was passed during the COVID session, and it was Together Louisiana did a ton of kind of voter engagement and outreach and education. We had a Civic Academy campaign about Amendment 5, and that's, stellar tax cuts were one of the things that dug the hole, and then the corporate tax exemptions are the other part that dug the hole. We took that fight to the ballot box, and we beat that amendment in every single parish in the state. And so when people get this information, they know what to do about it. It's just a matter of doing exactly what we're doing in this room, which is kind of teaching the system and how skewed it is and organizing around that. And so that's from a Together Louisiana perspective, that's kind of my answer. It's our job to get really smart about this and come up with solutions so we can play defense and then also propose a viable alternative.
That's right. That's right. When we know, we can act, and that's what we're doing. Thank you, Erin. Let me ask this question. What can be introduced in even years? That is the next session. You want to talk to that? Say a word about that, Matthew?
Yeah.
Representative Willard.
So you are significantly limited in what you can do during even years. The fiscal sessions are the odd number years. There's really 4 things you can do as it relates to tax policies during even number years. Number 1, you can legislate related to tax rebates. So that is one thing that you can do. You can't do anything related to deductions, credits, exemptions, exclusions, but you can legislate related to rebates. You can deal with property taxes because those are considered really local legislation. So you can legislate related to property taxes. You can lower taxes. So don't be surprised next year if we have legislation to lower taxes. And then the 4th thing you can do is related to administrative processes and procedures, the way collections are done, deadlines and stuff like that. Those are really the 4 buckets that you can deal with during even number years.
All right, very good. Any of our Jan or Erin, do you want to add to that in any way or comment on that?
He's right, of course. Representative Willard is right, and I think that is one of the structural problems with our budget and tax system, is that you can cut taxes anytime, And all it takes is a majority vote. It only takes a majority vote in the House and Senate to cut the budget, to take healthcare away from a child, or to lower, increase the cost of higher education by cutting our investments in higher education. But if you want to raise $1 of new revenue, then you can only do that every other year, and it requires a 2/3 supermajority vote. That is in our Constitution, and that is frankly a vestige of institutional racism. There's only a handful of states in the United States that have that supermajority requirement for raising revenue. Louisiana is one of them. There's about 8 or 9 states at last count that have that supermajority requirement. And it's one of those structural features of our tax system that makes it very hard to change these things that were outlined in the video. And even though a lot of things have changed for the better, frankly, since 2016, I think we need to give credit to the work that's been done since 2016. We still have these structural barriers to really making our system as fair as it needs to be, and as equitable as it needs to be.
All right. Thank you, Jan. Erin, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Reverend?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Danny Engelberg at the Orleans Public Defender's Office. Yeah, we've been watching this temporary sales tax because we think it could potentially impact a lot of funding, but including our own. What I guess is a question for all the guests is what's the likelihood that it'll be addressed this upcoming session, and whether it might be for any additional time? I guess, yeah, just broadly, where do you think this temporary sales tax goes in the next year and the following year? Is it just going to sunset and then just be a cut?
Yeah, so what I would say, Danny, is I actually thought that it would be addressed this session. There were efforts this year that really didn't get much traction. Last year, they received more attention, that would have basically took the revenue generated by that 0.45 and put it into separate dedicated accounts, meaning that it would not be used for the general fund, which would basically have been a way to phase us into not having these dollars in the general fund. Look, I'm never surprised in the legislature because I never expect anything to go a certain way, right? I always expect the unexpected. That said, I do expect that 0.45 to roll off. I don't think it will be renewed. Whether it happens next year or in 2025, I can't say. But I really don't expect it to be renewed beyond 2025.
And Erin, what does that then for Representative Willard? What is that? What is that, a $400+ million gap at that point?
It depends. It depends how it's handled, right? So it definitely takes $400+ million away from the budget. You could take money from LED. You could take money for incentive programs. You could take money away from DOTD for infrastructure projects. If you do none of that, then healthcare is going to get cut and higher education are going to get cut. So you can do it in a way to where it doesn't have like a magnifying terrible impact on the state, which I hope is the way it's done. That's certainly what I'll be advocating for. And I think if we deal with it next year, we are more likely to do it in a responsible way as opposed to 2025, where you kind of have this dumpster fire scenario, and people are just voting to not increase the sales tax. So they're voting to let it expire, but not really dealing with the ramifications of the $400 million coming out of the state general fund.
Thank you. Excellent question. Excellent question. Let me ask this. When we look at,
I want to add something.
Yeah, Jan probably has some.
I want to add something to this, and I agree with everything Rep. Willard said, but I want to just put some perspective on this temporary tax. When Governor Edwards came in 2016, there was a $2 billion shortfall. And if you remember, there was talk about, closing hospitals and closing universities. It was a real crisis left by the previous governor, a structural deficit, and there were no more state buildings left to sell or one-time money that you could do. So, and the only place you could get quick money, revenue to the state was through a sales tax increase, because even if you wanted to implement an income tax increase, it takes a year for that to kick in. So you didn't have, they had to do the sales tax. They did a 2-year temporary sales tax the first time in 2016. And the idea was, and they had a task force on structural budget and tax reform to come in. They got a lot of people on it. We were part of that task force to come up with a more permanent solution to fixing our tax structure. And the commission did its work and came out with some great recommendations. You can still find them on the Department of Revenue's website. And that was supposed to happen in 2017, the second year of Governor Edwards' administration. Those recommendations were completely ignored. And so then they came in 2018, and the question was, do you renew this sales tax or do you close hospitals and close services? And then in 2018, that's when they arrived at the compromise at the 11th hour, a quarter to midnight during one of the special sessions. And they decided to renew 0.45 of that penny till 2025. Now, Rep. Willard is exactly correct, of course. If we don't renew this 0.45 sales tax, that's $450 million we have now that goes to support programs that people need that would be going away. There's another $300 million that we get from vehicle sales taxes that are being diverted from the general fund into the transportation trust fund. That was a decision made a couple of years ago by the legislature. So all total, you're talking about, $750 million or so that was supporting, state programs. That's not going to be in the general fund anymore. Our position at the budget project is that the legislature should replace that revenue with some other form of revenue. That if you just let that revenue expire, you're going to be right back where you were or in a similar place that you were, where you have these structural deficits year after year, and you're forced to decide between funding education or healthcare or some other programs and deciding where to cut, as opposed to where you've been the last few years, where the debate has been a much healthier debate, and it's been, where do we invest? And there have been a lot of good investments made by the legislature. Now, nobody's going to say it was perfect, and everybody could argue with the details, but we're in a lot better place fiscally as a state right now than we were in 2016 and 2018. And a lot of it is because of those difficult decisions that were made. So the temporary sales tax is nobody's perfect idea of how to fund state government, but the alternative is making cuts and deciding how much, do we want to put into giving people accused of crimes their constitutional right to a public defense. And do we have to choose between that and healthcare or paying teachers? We have a crisis in the classroom in the state because we pay our teachers so much less than other states in the South. So we need more revenue coming into state government, not less. And that's a debate that ideally should happen next year, but probably will be punted to 2025.
Well, and to
Absolutely.
piggyback on that, Jan, so next year we could decide to eliminate the 0.45. We could do it a year early, whatever, but we can't make up the revenue loss next year.
Right.
It would only be able to happen in 2025. This year, we did have a couple of bills that would have increased revenue. One of mine passed. It eliminated triple dipping for tax credit people and businesses receive for income that they earn in other states. That saves the state about $40 million a year. And then Democratic Caucus Chairman Representative Sam Jenkins had a new tax bill that was going to levy a sales tax on digital products. Now, I know it's sales tax, but what's going on is that a lot of the things that we do online are not taxed. And so his structure would have captured revenue from online sales, really as it relates to streaming, downloads, and all kind of other things that are done online. So there were a couple measures this session to generate revenue that would have prepared us to get rid of that 0.45 income sales tax increase. But the big one, Representative Sam Jenkins' bill, did not move past Ways and Means Committee.
Very good. I have so many questions in my head about all of this, but I want to get to this next question and then move to some more questions from the audience participants that I know have a lot of questions. But this is for the Louisiana Bucket Brigade Bucket Brigade budget project. So Jan, let me ask you this: what does an equitable, sustainable tax system look like? And let me see, and how do we get there? Just start there.
Well, that's a great question, Reverend Manning, and I want to start with that figure from the video that said, that showed that, not only are we raising less money in state and local taxes than most other states, but we're raising it in the wrong way. So I think you have to approach it from, what is the ideal, and then what is possible to achieve in Louisiana. And those are two very, very different questions, because I think nobody would build the system we have today if you could build a state tax structure from scratch. It just doesn't make any sense to build what we have today. I think ideally a tax structure that would work the best is one where there's probably more equal responsibility shared between state and local government. Right now, the reason that our sales tax is so high is our state sales tax is fairly in line with actually a little bit below the national average, even at 4.45, and we have some constitutional protections that are very strong. We don't have a state sales tax on groceries, on prescription drugs, or home utilities, and those are exemptions that really protect low-income families from paying taxes on necessities. What we do have is local governments have a lot of constraints on their ability to raise revenue. And so what they end up doing is raising most of their revenue from sales taxes that don't have those exemptions. So where we get to having this highest in the country sales tax is when you combine the state and the local. Having said that, I think the best tax structure, I think, would be one that asks those with the most wealth and income to pay the highest share. I believe in a progressive tax structure where the highest incomes, income above certain threshold, is taxed at higher rates, where we have fewer deductions and credits and tax breaks for our income tax, where corporations pay their fair share. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a sales tax at all, but I think a system that is sort of broad-based, that is progressive, and that includes fewer tax breaks, and that approaches it from the perspective of what sort of what do we expect state government to provide? What services can we expect the state to provide? And we don't ask that question enough, because even in a year like this, when the legislature has relatively good, very good revenue outlook, there's still a lot of needs that are not being addressed. Public defense is obviously top of mind in this discussion, but we still have a crisis in our juvenile justice system. We still have a crisis in child welfare. in this state. There are a lot of basic public services that we are just not doing a good job of providing, that if we did a better job, we could give families a stronger safety net and a better chance at reaching their full potential. And so we're not asking that basic question. So I think we need to be, again, progressive, broad-based, and not funded by kind of temporary taxes that have to be renewed every other year or something, so that we can have a fairly predictable stream of revenue coming in every year. It's always going to fluctuate a little bit, but these temporary taxes are a bad way to fund state government. I think people
Absolutely.
would all agree on that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let me ask Erin and first Erin and then Representative Willard, your thoughts on that.
I would just underscore everything that you just said, Jan, especially at the end. So many people that we talk to in our organizing work are experiencing a failure of the public sector to really provide, whether that's education or healthcare or streets or safety. Those services have just been hollowed out, and it's because they don't have proper funding, or that's one reason for it. And that really was what motivated us to want to look. I think Brooke Randolph, you asked in the chat about why don't we find other pots of money to pull from, and so that really was the impetus for digging in on the industrial tax exemption program and realizing that the 1% to 2% of the businesses in Louisiana are getting this massive tax break that's, I don't want to be dramatic, but defrauding our public services. And that's why one reason why local, that portion of sales tax that is the local sales tax is so high in many parishes and in many places around the state, is to make up for the lack of revenue that's coming in from some of the largest property owners, which are industrial corporations. And
that was one of my next question, Erin, and I'm so glad you hit on that, is what role do those tax exemptions have in the lack of creating an equitable, sustainable tax system? And it's almost a no-brainer. I don't know, you have the absolute or complete stats on that in regards to how much revenue we lose each year because of those tax exemptions.
So I can chime in on that. Actually, I think this session alone, we heard it was either $2 or $4 billion worth of tax credits, exemptions, deductions. So to put that in perspective, that's, Jan, do you remember if it was 2 or 4? Was it 4?
I want to say it was over 2.
Yeah.
I think Chairman Bishop had the number at some point.
That does not include ITEP. I see somebody Erin dropped that does not include ITEP, because ITEP is money coming away from locals, right? And so whether it was 2 billion, whether it's 2.5 billion, that's revenue that the state otherwise would be collecting if these exemptions, credits, deductions, and other programs were not on the book. The other thing that I'll just quickly add, as it relates to a sustainable and equitable tax structure, I totally agree with Jan. I totally agree with Erin. The only thing I would add is that you really have to go into property taxes. So local governments charge that sales tax because they have to come up with revenue some kind of way. If you eliminate ITEP, local governments will receive a lot of funding, billions of dollars in funding from property taxes. Also, it's a hot topic, but nonprofits pay 0 in property taxes. That is something else that I think, if you really want to talk about equitable and sustainable tax policies and structure, you have to look at that 100% nonprofit property tax exemption and maybe seeing if you can scale it down or however. But I did want to mention that too.
Yeah, pastors kind of get nervous when you talk about that. But
I totally, I know, and there's a way to do it to where it does not directly impact y'all. But if we want to grow to something better, we have to put all the cards on the table. I believe Tulane University is close to $1 billion in property taxes that they aren't paying, or hundreds of millions of dollars. So I mean, we're talking about huge figures. Oshner, I mean,
absolutely,
I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I'm just, presenting information.
There are certainly those, even with those non-profits that would bear a heavier burden than others. And the little old Broadmoor Community Church, I can't keep up with Tulane. So yeah, let's go to the big dogs first. Let's see. One more, another question here, and then I'm going to go to the audience. Maybe I should go to the audience now because we're running out of time. So I'm sorry I didn't get all the questions. Y'all just did a wonderful job. But let me take some questions from the participants to see if they have any, especially before Representative Willard has to leave. So any questions that we're seeing in the chat or otherwise, just speak up. Let's see, one of our pillars, help me out there. You see any questions?
I'm wondering about the governor's race and how we can put pressure.
What? Yeah, Jan, why don't you take that one?
Well, we're a nonprofit, so I want to be careful, and we're definitely nonpartisan, and we're going to work with whoever the next governor is. But I think the first thing we have to do is to get them to be very specific on what they plan to do as governor. One of the things that was very distressing to me 4 years ago was when we had the last governor's race. The Republican candidate in the runoff never had an issues section on his website. There was never any clear vision or articulation of what he had planned to do, not just on taxes and budgets, but on anything. And I don't think we've seen a lot of that right now from the candidates in this race. And I think it is up to citizens and to journalists and to everybody to demand specifics. I will say the only person I've seen with a really specific plan, it's not a plan that I care for myself, but Representative Nelson is running for governor on a plan to eliminate the personal and corporate income tax. Again, as Rep. Willard illustrated, there are a lot of problems with that, starting with the fact that you're blowing a $5 billion hole in the budget, and you're raising a whole bunch of other taxes to make up for that gap, and probably pushing the tax burden onto more low and moderate income families. But at least it's a plan. I have not heard a plan from other people running for governor, and I think it behooves people to go out and if you're going to ask people to vote for you on October 14th, and that's coming up soon, we need to understand what their plans are, because they're going to have to make tough decisions. A governor has to propose a balanced budget to the legislature every year, and they have choices, and how much you decide to raise in taxes, how much revenue you raise, who you raise that money from, and how you distribute those dollars among all the state's needs are like the fundamental thing that state government does. Those are moral decisions. And I think you need to articulate that before you ask somebody to vote. And we haven't seen that yet.
Thank you. We need to put pressure there and articulating those issues. Let me go to another question. Do we have another question on that?
I know Rep. Willard has to go, so I want to just if there's anything that I see it's
I have a question. I have a question, Reverend Manning, for Reverend Willard. Representative Willard. So I was very concerned that a lot of the representatives had gone to Baton Rouge with their 5 agenda items or the 5 bills, and no one ever came to us with any of the asking the constituency what we wanted represented in this session. And so perhaps we could have avoided some of these issues if the representatives had come to the constituency and asked us what we wanted, or not even avoid it, but even address some of it, address some of the needs. When you're in Baton Rouge or wherever you go, you guys represent us, but you just go, and I don't know who y'all talk to or who y'all got feedback from, but I didn't hear from anybody, and I'm pretty connected for the most part. I'm sorry?
Where do you live?
I live in Lakeview, but I'm around the city in Treme, Holly Grove,
I was just making sure you weren't in my district. I can't speak for everybody. Before session, I send out a survey to my constituents. I get their feedback on issues that are very important to them. I get their feedback on issues that I know will be bills to see how they would prefer me to vote. And so I go to my neighborhood association meetings, and I really go speak wherever I'm invited. I've worked with my constituents on legislation before. I've done so with property taxes, voting measures, insurance measures, property insurance measures. And so I can't speak for everybody. But for me, when I have constituents reach out to me and they say, these are my concerns, or if they say, can we meet? I always do it. And so, again, I'm not speaking for everybody. What I would suggest is maybe trying to reach out to your representative or your senator to let them know how you think, how you feel, what you want them to do, request a meeting with them, see if they'll give you one. And look, at the end of the day, if you're not getting the response that you want from them, reach out to my office. I mean, I work with people that aren't my constituents either. I'd be happy to help you and work with you, especially if you have ideas on legislation.
Representative Willard, that is a good model that you follow and a good example in terms of how you reach out and with the survey and attending community meetings and so forth. Every representative needs to follow that, and if they're not, we need to put a weight on them to pick up that example and do the same. And if not, listen, you don't need to be voted back in if you're not going to represent the constituents.
Re-election is this year, Reverend Manning. So you got a chance to pick somebody else.
That's right. That's right. Representative, I know you got to go to a fantastic dinner. Any final words before you jump off of here?
Keep doing what y'all are doing. I think you have great organizations a part of this panel discussion. Together, Louisiana and the Budget Project are certainly allies of mine in the Capitol. I'm happy that they support most, if not all, of the measures that I try to bring forward for the state of Louisiana. I certainly could not get through Ways and Means Committee, which is the taxation committee, without Jan and his team at the Budget Project. So it's a collaborative effort. We know that the other side has a deep pocket industry and lobbyists, giving them, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this. For us, we have to work that much harder to make a difference. And when we're informed, when we have the information, when your voices are heard in the Capitol, we can change the tide and we can make a difference. So keep doing what you're doing. Don't get discouraged. Please keep fighting. And if I can do anything for any of you, please reach out to me. Please reach out to my office. It's always a pleasure, and I'm honored to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Willard. We appreciate all that you're doing, and you're a good friend of Justice and Beyond. And we just are so grateful to have you up there in the State House. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Reverend Manning. Take care. Have a blessed week.
All right, you too. Jan and Erin, just one more question that I have here, and then I'll see if there's any more questions from you all. Maybe you can answer this, or maybe this was one for Representative Willard. But obviously this is a concern, when it comes to how much money New Orleans is sending to the state, and in turn, how much reciprocally in reciprocity, I'll say, is given back to New Orleans. Can you kind of give us some indication of maybe what your thoughts on that, or what you see happening?
That's a good question. I don't think I have a good answer. I've never seen, there's a lot of studies that show, how much different states send to Washington and how much they get back. And certainly Louisiana gets back a lot more than we pay in. And that's a factor of our high rates of poverty. Most of the money that comes in is what we call means tested dollars that come in for things like food assistance, healthcare, and also hurricane recovery. I would say if you count the hurricane recovery dollars, since New Orleans tends to get hit more than other parts of the state, or certainly the southern part of the state gets hit more, then South Louisiana probably gets more dollars. And there's certainly a perception, so the answer is I don't know. I've never seen a study on tax contributions to the state fisc by region versus what folks get back. So I don't know the answer to that. Certainly New Orleans contributes a lot. I know that, if you talk to some rural legislators, people from North Louisiana, Central Louisiana, there's often a perception that New Orleans gets more than its share. I don't think that's true. I didn't think it was true back when New Orleans had some of the leaders. I mean, Senator Ilario was from there, and Speaker Jim Tucker, and you had Senate President Chasson from right up the road. So you had a lot of legislative leaders that come out of the New Orleans area, and you had Representative Walt Leger was the Speaker pro tem. But I don't know. I think one way that the state, certainly like New Orleans generates a huge share of the tourist revenue that comes into the state, and that's sales tax dollars that come in. But yeah, I don't, Erin, what you got?
I don't know the answer either. It's a really interesting question. The one thing I do know on this topic is just that there is tension between local governments that are responsible for really accounting and meeting the needs of the communities that they serve most closely on one hand, and then some of the state level politicians who can be in some cases can be a little further removed from the situation on the ground. I mean, I don't think Representative Willard is an example of that, but where we see this play, where my organization sees this play out is with the industrial tax exemption program, where the authority to grant those exemptions for years was with a state level board that had no connection with the budgetary process. So what we heard in talking with local officials is it's really important that local people have the ability to raise and lower revenues and choose how to allocate that money. If you're completely beholden to the state to provide those funds, and it just really makes it hard to meet the needs of your people where you're at.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin, for chiming in there. Appreciate your perspective. Let me see if there's any more questions. I got time for about 2 questions from any participants that are on the call right now that have questions for either Jan or Erin. Any questions on deck?
Reverend Manning, this is Betty DeMarco.
Go ahead, Betty.
I do have a question about the property tax. We keep talking, it looks like Louisiana, and it is very low on property taxes. But those of us in New Orleans since Katrina have really been being hit with property tax because the city needs it. Are the other parishes not doing the same thing that Orleans did? Because my property tax went from $350 a year before Katrina. It's now about $5,800. So are other parishes taxing their citizens for property? Because I hate to think if the state decides that we are going to be like Texas and nothing but property tax, my taxes will be $11,000 a year, and I won't be able to afford a piece of property any longer when that happens. So that's my, what's going on with the rest of the state and their property taxes?
Erin, you want to jump in there and then I'll go to Jan? If you know.
I'm realizing how little I know on this phone call. Betty, there is a really good report that's issued by the tax commission that articulates the millages in each parish. And so you can compare property tax rates across parishes. I'm gonna dig that up and send it to you. Jan, what do you know about this?
I was going to refer to the same report. The tax commission is who tracks this. It definitely varies by parish. Obviously, we've seen property values go up quite a bit in recent years, probably more so in New Orleans than other parts of the state. But here in Baton Rouge, that's happened as well. And we saw a run up of value after during the pandemic. We saw a huge run up in property value. The other thing I would suggest, and this is, I don't have the data, but I remember, I was a Times-Picayune reporter before I did this. And I remember the story. I've always been based in Baton Rouge, but I remember all the stories about how New Orleans had, 7 assessors and was badly underassessed for a long time, where people, everybody kind of knew their assessor and could go and get a sweetheart deal. And so part of it may have been that property in New Orleans was badly underassessed for generations, and that the assessments have finally caught up to the value of the property. But I am not an expert on property taxes in New Orleans. I know here in Baton Rouge, my taxes have gone up, but certainly nothing on the scale that you describe.
Right.
And my property taxes are way below what my parents paid growing up when I was growing up in Pittsburgh in the 1980s and 90s, where property taxes were a much bigger part of the revenue pie.
Yeah, that's a lot of catching up as far as this assessment is concerned, to go take that huge of a jump. And what was, to quote that video that Erin showed, I think it said the annual average was, what was this, in 2008, 2009 was 650 or something. Gosh, that is, that's not as Betty indicated, not the story of what we're hearing. Again, that was almost 2 decades ago, or a decade and a half ago. But wow, I'm hearing that across the board with members of my congregation too, Betty. That same thing. It's just pricing people out of New Orleans. One more question, then we got to close. Any more questions? Well,
I've got
there
a
are
question.
not.
I've got
go
a
ahead,
question.
Lane. Go ahead, Lane.
What is the impetus, or what, not the impetus, I know what the impetus is. What's the rationale for eliminating income taxes, at least the residential income tax? I mean, is there some belief that we're going to attract all these CEOs and rich retirees or whatever? What is the rationale?
Yeah, I mean, let me be clear. I think it is an absolutely terrible idea. But yeah, the idea is that the supporters of eliminating the income tax will say that they don't have one in Texas and they don't have one in Florida, and look at how fast those states are growing compared to Louisiana.
And they also have huge corporate bases that we don't have.
They have completely different tax structures. I mean, in Texas, they have very high property taxes. They also have a value-added tax that businesses pay. That was introduced here in Louisiana a few years ago, and it kind of got laughed out of the legislature. So nobody ever wants to talk about kind of the other side of the ledger. the fact is, and the idea is, well, you know, people will move here and it's going to create jobs. There's absolutely no evidence that will happen. Yeah, you know, most jobs aren't brought to Louisiana from someplace else. Most jobs are created by people and businesses who are already here, or are, you know, somebody who lives here has a good idea for a company and they start a business and maybe it takes off and they grow and they create jobs. So I think, you know, economic development folks love to sort of talk about like recruiting companies to come in. That's not what happens. The best thing we can do to grow our economy is invest in the people who are already here by making sure that we have access to good schools, that we have good roads, we have safe communities, we give people the tools to reach their highest potential. And if we keep more people here, then some of them are going to create jobs and really, you know, build up the state. And so I think the modern economy, and we've seen this a lot more since COVID, is really about human capital and how do we get, how do we develop the people that we have and attract, make people want to stay. New Orleans does a terrific job of that in many respects because there's such a vibrant culture, an inclusive culture, and unique culture that draws people. There's obviously things that need to be fixed. But I think that's the kind of things, you know, I think here in Baton Rouge, we have great parks and libraries but we have a real traffic problem, you know, and problems with our schools. But I think we just need to kind of get away from this mindset that's been a Louisiana mindset for 100 years, which is we just need to like shower corporations with as many tax breaks and favors as we possibly can, and hope that the benefits trickle down into everybody else, when we need to really be investing in people and communities, and sort of build it from the ground up.
And we have to really make clear to our legislators who are making these decisions that, you know, that might be a good theory, but we also have to link and look at the entire picture. And what I mean is we have an existential crisis that is climate change. And until we get real about that and the fact that New Orleans and the state of Louisiana is on the front line, and that people are really taking a great risk by moving to a state that people may one day have to be climate refugees from. So you kind of break down that whole argument that we're going to attract corporations when they look at the fact that we may not be able to live here for decades to come. So I just wanted to add that. It's time for us to wrap this up. Jan, thank you for all the work that you're doing with the Louisiana Budget Project, and Erin, as always, we appreciate your work with the Together Louisiana and all the incredible things that are going on with TLA and Together New Orleans as well too. Thank y'all for being here today and putting in your input. Any final thoughts that you want to say, Jan, before we let you go?
I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Reverend Manning, for having me, and everybody connected with Justice and Beyond. And it's great to see Erin and Together Louisiana. The work that they've done on ITEP and many other issues is truly inspirational, and just really thank you for this opportunity to come talk about tax policy. Go Tigers.
Thanks, Jan. Be
well. Watch some college baseball now.
Yes. Erin.
Nothing more to add aside from just thank you so much for having me here. It is good to be with you all. I already get to organize with many of you here on the call today, but if you would like to organize together, if you're a member of an institution, I'll drop my email in the chat, or you can talk to Ms. DeMarco or Reverend Connor, Reverend Manning, or Dr. Reichard, and we'll get connected that way. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Erin. Appreciate you being here. Everybody, let's go to any closing announcements that anybody may have about any events that we need to show up for and make our voices heard for. If you have any of those announcements, please make them at this time. Any announcements? Yes.
We are having a policy conference in Baton Rouge at the Water Campus on September 21st. We just sent out the save the date last week, but this is going to be the Invest in Louisiana Policy Conference. There'll be a lot more details to share in the coming weeks about, keynote speakers and panels and workshops. But if you're not on our email list, please go to our website, labudget.org. And that way you'll be sure to get the announcements when they come out. But I hope you will all make the trip to Baton Rouge on September 21st. It's a Thursday. It'll be about 3.5 weeks before the election, so there'll be a lot of timely conversations about the future of Louisiana.
Thank you, Jan. Appreciate that. Anybody else? All right, one last call. Any upcoming events that we need to be aware of? All right, everybody. Well, we're going to go ahead and leave it there. We always close in prayer. Let me ask Reverend Jeff Connor, would you close us in prayer, please?
Yes. God of love and justice, we thank you so much for these three who have poured their hearts, minds, and spirits into a more just Louisiana. And we know that there are many more who have done so, and we ourselves in Justice and Beyond seek to do so as your people. We know that there are many who are concerned about all of your people in this state. We pray, oh God, that you would help us to marshal our resources, marshal our spiritual forces to make a difference in our tax structure and our budget justice. Help us to find the ways to do so that we might see a different and better Louisiana for all. And we ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. All right, everybody. Go Tigers. Have a great night. Be safe. Be good to each other.
Thank you.
I think we're taking, we're taking next week off, I believe. And then we'll just stay tuned to our emails that we send out and see when we're coming back. All right, everybody. God bless y'all. Have a good night.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Good night.